Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You know that weird feeling when someone's watching you? That subtle, skin-prickling tension you can't quite shake, even though logic tells you there's no one there. I had that for weeks, brushing it off at first, blaming hormones or stress, or just being 8 months pregnant and emotionally worn thin. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something was off, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. At first, it was small things. I'd come home and see a gift bag sitting on the front steps, no card, no note, just a soft yellow baby blanket or a box of diapers wrapped in pastel tissue paper. I thought maybe it was one of Mark's coworkers or one of our neighbors being kind. I mean, people love babies, right? But then the gift started getting more personal. A crocheted onesie in navy blue with the letter B sewn on the front. A silver rattle engraved with the initials BL, my ex-husband's initials. That's when my stomach turned cold. I didn't want to believe it, but it clicked almost immediately. Linda, my ex-mother-in-law. The woman I thought I had finally escaped after years of strained, awkward dinners and icy glances. She was always a little too involved, a little too obsessed with pretending we were some perfect, traditional family. Even after Ben and I divorced, she kept texting me on holidays, asking for updates, sending birthday cards, acting like nothing had changed. I never responded, hoping she'd eventually get the message. But clearly, that wasn't enough. One afternoon, I saw her. I had just stepped outside with a trash bag in one hand and my phone in the other, and there she was, standing across the street behind the wheel of her car, just staring at my house. No smile, no wave, nothing. Just sitting there like she was watching a movie. I froze. She didn't move. We locked eyes for a second, and then she drove off without even pretending it was coincidence. I remember gripping the edge of the porch railing until my knuckles went white, just trying to steady my breath. When I told Mark about it, he looked confused more than concerned. "You sure it was her?" he asked, like I couldn't tell the difference between some random woman and the woman who used to judge every goddamn thing I wore, ate, or said. I nodded, heart pounding, and he said he'd talk to her if it happened again. That was Mark's way, reasonable, measured, not wanting to make waves. But I wasn't interested in being reasonable anymore. I was growing a whole human inside me, and I didn't have room for passive-aggressive ghosts from my past. I tried ignoring it. I really did. But then she started ringing the doorbell when Mark wasn't home. She'd smile, hand me some homemade cookies I wouldn't dare eat, and say things like, "You're glowing, sweetheart." Just like you did with Ben. You always had that softness about you. She'd peer around me like she expected to see a baby crawling across the living room. I'd shut the door in her face without a word. The worst was the night I found a card slipped under my windshield wiper in the grocery store parking lot. It was a baby shower card that read, "Can't wait to meet my grandson. Love, Grandma Linda." I hadn't told anyone where I was going that day. The way my heart dropped, it wasn't fear anymore. It was rage. Bone-deep, seething rage. I confronted her that same night. I drove straight to her house, pulled into the driveway, and knocked on her door so hard my knuckles split. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me, smug as ever. "You need help," I told her. "Professional help. You're not part of this life anymore, and you sure as hell won't be part of my child's." She looked at me, dead serious, and said, "But he is my grandchild. You just don't want to admit it." I swear, if Mark hadn't called me right then, I might have slapped her across that self-righteous face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about how far someone like her might go. I had heard stories, sure, but they always sounded like some Lifetime movie plot. I never thought I'd be living it. A week later, I went into labor. Mark was calm, supportive, and honestly, the one solid thing I had to hold on to through that pain. I was trying to focus on breathing, trying not to panic, when the nurse stepped into the room with a strange look on her face. "There's a visitor in the lobby," she said quietly. "She says she's the baby's grandmother, and she insists on seeing you before delivery." I froze. I didn't need to ask who it was. I already knew. Linda had followed me to the hospital. If you've ever given birth, you know exactly how raw and exposed a woman feels in those first few hours, when your body is still pulsing with adrenaline and exhaustion, when your baby's cries are the only sound tethering you to the moment, and all you want is peace. Quiet and maybe 5 minutes to breathe without someone barging into your life with opinions and judgment. But that's not what I got. I didn't get peace. I got Linda. She was in the hospital lobby, demanding to see me, acting like some scene out of a courtroom drama, insisting she had the right to meet her grandson. That's exactly what the nurse said when she returned to the room, her words verbatim. She said it's her grandson, and she won't leave until she sees him. Mark and I just looked at each other, and for a second, I thought he'd tell them to throw her out. Instead, he hesitated. He actually hesitated, like he was debating whether maybe this woman, this manipulative parasite from my past, had a valid point. I snapped. No, I told the nurse, louder than I meant to, she's not welcome here. She's not family. She's not even relevant anymore. The nurse nodded quickly and left, but the damage was already done. The mood in the room shifted. That moment of softness, that tiny bubble of joy we'd just created around our newborn son, was already poisoned by the tension in the air. It didn't stop there. Less than an hour later, while the baby was still curled against my chest and I was barely holding myself together from the sheer fatigue of labor, another knock came at the door. This time it was Mark's mother, Karen. Polished, uptight, and always dressed like she was auditioning for a country club membership, even in a hospital corridor. I thought maybe she'd come to offer comfort or congratulations, maybe bring flowers or something normal, something human. But no, Karen walked in with that tight little smile and eyes full of judgment, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She looked at Noah. Then she looked at me. And I swear to God, I could feel her dissecting me with her eyes, as if she were running mental calculations in her head. And then she said it. Just like that. He's precious, she said slowly, then turned to Mark. But don't you think he looks a little different? The silence in the room could have shattered glass. Mark's brow furrowed, confused. What do you mean, different? He asked, genuinely baffled. Karen shrugged, ever so casual, as if she hadn't just planted a grenade in the middle of the room. I'm just saying, she continued, there's a certain resemblance I expected. But babies change, I suppose. Still, it might put all our minds at ease if we just did a quick paternity test. You know, just to be sure. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke. But she didn't laugh. Mark didn't laugh. He looked stunned, frozen, caught between defending me and not wanting to offend his mother. And I saw it right there in his eyes, the flicker of doubt. It only lasted a second, but it was enough. Enough to gut me. Enough to make me feel like everything I had just gone through, the pain, the fear, the sacrifice, meant nothing in the face of two older women's paranoia and their toxic, generational obsession with control. I held Noah tighter, and I couldn't stop the words from flying out of my mouth. You want a paternity test? I said, voice sharp, trembling. Fine. Let's do the damn test. Let's settle this once and for all. Mark tried to speak, tried to say something to smooth the tension, but I cut him off with a glare that told him I wasn't interested in smoothing anything. Not anymore. Tell me honestly, if someone asked you for a paternity test while you were still bleeding from childbirth, would you take it as calmly as they expect? Would you hand over your dignity just to satisfy someone else's doubt? Or would you walk away and let them choke on their own poison? Because I swear to you, I could have walked right out that door and never looked back. But I didn't. I stayed. I held my ground. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about proving anything. This wasn't about DNA or biology or even logic. This was about power. This was about women like Karen and Linda needing to control something that was never theirs to begin with. So yes, we did the test. I stood there, cold and detached, while a nurse swabbed Noah's tiny cheek and handed the sample to the lab technician. Karen looked pleased, like she'd won something. Mark looked ashamed but said nothing. And me? I felt nothing. Just a quiet kind of fury building under my skin. Because now it wasn't just about proving Noah's parentage. It was about burning every bridge they thought they could use to control me. And I was more than ready to light the match. When the paternity test results came back, the air in the room was so thick with anticipation you could slice through it with a dull butter knife. The envelope was handed to Mark, but for a few seconds he just stared at it like it was ticking, like maybe opening it would somehow change something about our reality. Maybe shift things into some version where his mother had been right, and I was the liar they all secretly feared I might be. He finally peeled the seal open and skimmed the first page, then the second, and then looked up at me with a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "It's mine," he said simply, almost softly, like the words were catching in his throat. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The result was obvious to anyone with eyes and half a working brain, but apparently, DNA had to spell it out in black and white for people like Karen to believe their own damn son. The silence that followed was more deafening than any screaming match could have been. It was the silence of guilt, of shame, of knowing someone crossed a line, but not having the decency to admit it out loud. Karen offered one of those awkward, half-hearted apologies that don't even deserve to be called apologies. The kind where they say sorry without ever acknowledging what they actually did wrong. She stood in the doorway of our living room, clutching her purse like she couldn't wait to leave, and muttered, "Well, I suppose that's good news, then. I'm sorry if I caused tension. I was just looking out for my son. Looking out for her son." That's the line they always use, isn't it? As if protecting your son means treating his partner like a potential con artist, a manipulative fraud, a ticking time bomb that might ruin their precious family legacy. I didn't even respond to her. I didn't need to waste breath on someone so emotionally bankrupt. I just stared at her until she got uncomfortable enough to leave. Mark didn't say much either, which annoyed me more than anything else. He seemed relieved, like now that the box was checked and the science had spoken, we could all move on and pretend none of it happened. But that's the thing about trauma, it doesn't vanish just because the evidence clears your name. The damage doesn't get undone with a piece of paper. I wish that had been the end of it. I wish we could have had our peace after that. But no, Linda wasn't finished. I should have known she'd never go quietly. Not her. A few days later, I noticed she'd started posting vague, cryptic things on Facebook. Things like, "Some people steal more than hearts," or "Truth has a way of surfacing eventually." And the comments, the comments were filled with concerned friends and church ladies chiming in with, "Praying for you, Linda," and "You're such a strong woman, don't let evil win." I stayed quiet at first, thinking she'd get bored if I didn't react. But then the phone calls started, anonymous, always at night, always silence on the other end, or sometimes just breathing. It was subtle enough to be dismissed by anyone else, but I knew what it was. I knew who was behind it. She wanted me to feel watched, to feel hunted, to feel like I was slowly unraveling. And damn it, it worked. I was losing sleep, jumping at shadows, checking locks twice, sometimes 3 times before bed. Mark noticed, of course, but instead of doing anything useful, he just kept suggesting that maybe everyone just needs time to adjust. Adjust to what? To the fact that 2 grown women were actively sabotaging the peace in our home? That his own mother had treated me like a criminal and now wanted to pretend she hadn't? That my ex-mother-in-law was staging a slow-burn psychological war from her cozy suburban bunker? It finally hit me one night while I was nursing Noah in the dim glow of the living room lamp. Mark wasn't protecting me. He was managing me. He wasn't standing up to anyone. He was smoothing over the chaos, trying to keep all the plates spinning without ever acknowledging that some of them were sharp-edged and flying straight toward me. He wanted harmony, even if it meant I had to stay silent and swallow my anger. But I wasn't going to keep swallowing. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning, early spring, still cold enough that the wind bit through your coat and carried just enough sting to wake you up before the coffee did. I went outside to grab the mail, still groggy, still half-focused on the weight of the baby monitor in my pocket. And there it was, taped to the side of the mailbox, plain as day. A photograph of Noah. My baby, my son, printed and cropped in a way that made my stomach twist. Someone had taken that picture without my knowledge. Someone had stood close enough to see his face, close enough to snap that image and walk away without being noticed. And scrawled across the bottom in thick, black marker, just one word. Mine. I stood there in the driveway, the cold burning my cheeks, my hands shaking around that goddamn photo, and all I could think was this. This wasn't just a feud anymore. This was a war. And I wasn't about to play nice anymore. There comes a point where your instinct stops whispering and starts screaming, and mine had been howling for weeks. After the photo incident, after that vile little snapshot taped to my mailbox with the word, mine, scratched across it like a goddamn threat, I finally accepted what I should have known from the start. There is no reasoning with people who are drunk on control. So I did what I should have done long before. I cut them both off completely. No calls, no visits, no updates, no access. Nothing. I told Mark, calmly but firmly, that this was non-negotiable. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I didn't try to convince him. I simply laid it down like stone. Our son was no longer going to be a pawn between two emotionally unstable women playing whatever twisted game they thought they were entitled to. He nodded slowly, lips pressed tight, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, he was on my side this time. But that hope didn't last long. It started subtly, as it always does. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. She started with the passive-aggressive voicemails, the kind drenched in sugar, but sharp as razors beneath the surface. I just hope Noah doesn't forget his grandma, she said in one, her voice so fake soft I could feel my teeth grinding just listening to it. Then came the texts to Mark, one after another, always painting herself as the innocent victim in this manufactured tragedy. I'm being shut out, she wrote. I'm not even allowed to hold my grandson. What did I do to deserve this? And God help me, Mark started to listen. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the hesitation creeping back into his eyes like mildew in the corners of a house you thought was clean. He didn't say much at first, but his silence said plenty. He was starting to believe her version of events, that I was overreacting, that I was making things worse, that I was the one causing conflict instead of responding to it. I caught him one night standing in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones. I didn't need to ask who he was talking to, I already knew. I asked him anyway, and he lied. That was when something inside me cracked. Not broke, just cracked, just enough to let the cold truth seep in. This wasn't just a war with the mothers anymore. It was creeping into my own home, into my bed, into the very foundation I was trying to build for my child. Then came the voicemail from Linda. It was short, just 30 seconds of her sobbing and sniffling into the phone, but the words she chose were like hooks beneath my skin. I know what you're hiding, Emily, she said through the tears. I know the truth, even if no one else wants to believe it. Then she hung up. No explanation. No context. Just that cold, lingering implication that she had something on me, or wanted people to think she did. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there, feeling the walls of the house pressing in like a cage. I started doubting myself, not because I believed her, but because the constant pressure was warping my sense of reality. That's how gaslighting works, isn't it? Not by convincing you the lie is true, but by making you question whether the truth is solid enough to stand on anymore. And then something strange floated back into my mind. A memory I'd brushed off at the time, too distracted by contractions and medical charts and newborn cries to give it much attention. I remembered a nurse in the delivery ward, smiling warmly at Linda before she'd even introduced herself, saying, "Your grandson is beautiful." But no one had told the nurse who Linda was. No one had introduced her, no one had said a word. So how did she know? How did she already assume Linda was the grandmother? That question burned a new hole in my thoughts. I started wondering what else had Linda done behind the scenes. What stories had she told? What groundwork had she already laid while I was too exhausted or too trusting to notice? The paranoia wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was survival. I couldn't afford to dismiss anything. A few days later, I was leaving the grocery store, arms full of baby formula and diaper packs, already mentally juggling the to-do list waiting for me back home, when I saw it. My car looked normal at first glance, but as I got closer, I noticed something taped to the driver's side windshield. An envelope, large and yellowed, the kind used in offices and courtrooms, and files labeled confidential. I froze. My hands started shaking before I even touched it. Inside were photographs, glossy and deliberately arranged, each one feeling like a trap. The first few were old pictures of me and Ben from years ago, taken during our marriage, smiling at parties, holding hands at family gatherings. But then came the newer ones. One was recent, a blurry, distorted photo of me pushing Noah's stroller through the park, with Ben walking several feet behind us. But I knew what it was supposed to imply. The framing was deliberate, calculated, as if we'd been walking together, as if we were still involved. And then I saw the final photo, the one that turned my blood cold. A shot of me, cropped and altered, clearly photoshopped, showing me holding Noah with Ben's hand awkwardly added on his shoulder, like we were some perfect little family unit. It was clumsy work, but it was good enough to cast doubt in the mind of someone already looking for reasons not to trust me. I sat in my car for 10 full minutes, staring at those images, trying to wrap my head around what the hell was happening. This wasn't just passive-aggressive Facebook posts or midnight voicemails anymore. This was a setup, a campaign, a damn smear operation, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. But one thing was suddenly very clear. They weren't trying to be part of my life. They were trying to destroy it. The worst part about being targeted by people who smile to your face is that you never really see the knife coming until it's already sunk in. After I found that manila envelope filled with doctored photos and years-old memories twisted into new lies, I couldn't stop thinking about how deliberate it all felt. Someone wasn't just trying to stir drama, they were building a story, crafting a version of my life that wasn't even remotely real, but convincing enough to sow doubt if it fell into the wrong hands. It wasn't just manipulative, it was surgical. I started piecing it together, not just the photos, but the timing of everything, when the voicemail started, when Karen's comments shifted from subtle digs to calculated guilt trips, when Linda's cryptic Facebook posts became full-blown insinuations. The story wasn't random chaos anymore. It was a narrative. And I was starting to realize I wasn't just the victim of two unhinged mothers, I was the enemy in a story they were writing together. That revelation hit me late one night, well after midnight, when I couldn't sleep and found myself scrolling through social media, half hoping I'd catch something that made sense of all this. I found it on an old post buried in Karen's timeline, nothing remarkable at first glance, just a photo of her garden and some comment about spring. But then I saw the comment below it. A single heart emoji from a familiar name. Linda. At first, I thought it might have been a coincidence. Maybe they knew each other from years ago, from some distant family function, a baby shower, something. But then I clicked through Linda's profile, and there it was, dozens of interactions stretching back months. Likes, comments, private exchanges. Not just acquaintances. They were in regular contact. They were allies. I felt my stomach twist. My world shifted on its axis, because that meant everything was a setup from the beginning. The hospital tension, the demand for the paternity test, the fake apology, even the timing of those damn photos. It wasn't two separate women losing their grip. It was two predators working in sync, building a shared illusion to tear me down. I confronted Mark the next morning before he even had a chance to finish his coffee. I laid the phone down on the table, pulled up the messages, the comments, the shared history, and looked him dead in the eye. "Tell me you didn't know," I said. "Tell me you had no idea they've been talking behind our backs for months." His silence gave me my answer before his mouth could form words. "I knew they had talked," he finally said, eyes low, voice sheepish like a child caught stealing cookies. But I didn't think it was serious. I thought maybe it would help them get along, maybe help them move on if they could talk to each other. I didn't think it would go this far. That was the exact moment something inside me snapped. All the patience, all the emotional acrobatics I'd been doing to hold this house together, to keep the peace, to keep the poison from seeping into my child's life, it all evaporated. I wasn't just disappointed anymore. I was done. If they wanted war, I was done playing defense. I started digging through old text threads, old voicemails, anything that might serve as proof. I pulled up old recordings, some accidental, some intentional, where they'd hinted, slipped, or outright confessed things they thought would never come back to haunt them. I pieced together their voices, their accusations, their fake narratives. I found one voicemail from Linda saying, "She doesn't deserve that baby," followed by another where Karen said to Mark, "Maybe if we push her hard enough, she'll leave." Then I got bold. I called Karen, pretending to soften, pretending to consider letting her visit Noah again. I baited her, carefully, skillfully, making her feel safe enough to speak freely. I left my phone recording on the table. She talked herself right into the fire. She admitted the fake photo. She bragged about how easy it was to plant suspicion. She laughed about how naive I was to trust anyone. I sent that recording to Linda next, via text, just one line. "Thought you might like to hear how loyal your friend really is." She took the bait too, left me a raging voicemail in response, one where she admitted they'd been coordinating stories, crafting a legal case to try and get visitation rights, grandparent rights, she called it. As if Noah was some community asset they were entitled to split custody over. And then I packaged it all up. All the audio files, the screenshots, the social media posts, the fake photos, everything. I compiled it into one brutal, unfiltered file and sent it anonymously to a popular local parenting podcast known for exposing family court abuses and toxic in-law stories. I didn't use my name. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. The episode aired within a week. They titled it, "The Baby Tug-of-War, When Grandparents Go Too Far," and it went viral faster than I ever expected. Thousands of comments poured in, some in shock, some in fury, some laughing at how insane it all sounded. But buried beneath the entertainment value was something more powerful, truth. My truth. And now, it wasn't just mine to carry anymore. I didn't tell Mark I'd send it. I didn't need to. He heard it on his drive home one afternoon, and I saw his face the moment he walked in, pale, stunned, gutted. He didn't say a word. He just nodded slowly and went to his room without looking at me. For the first time in months, I finally felt a little lighter. But deep down, I knew this war wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. There's a moment in every woman's life when she finally stops begging to be believed and starts burning bridges without looking back. For me, that moment came 3 weeks after the podcast episode aired, when Mark stood in our kitchen with his shoulders slumped and his hands shoved deep into his pockets, trying to tell me he just needed time to process everything. As if he hadn't already spent the last 6 months watching me get emotionally gutted by his mother and my ex-mother-in-law without ever lifting a damn finger to stop it. That was the day I stopped pretending there was anything left to fix between us. That was the day I chose peace over partnership and sanity over loyalty to a man who never really had my back when it counted. The breakup was quiet, but not soft. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just packed a single bag for myself and Noah, took the backup savings account I'd kept in a locked drawer just in case, and walked out the front door with my son on my hip and my dignity still intact. Mark didn't try to stop me. Maybe he knew he didn't have the right. Maybe he finally saw what he looked like standing next to the wreckage his silence had enabled. The very next morning, I filed restraining orders against both Linda and Karen. I walked into that courthouse holding a folder full of printed screenshots, audio transcripts, voicemails, and photos, and I laid it all out with the precision of a prosecutor who's been rehearsing her opening statement for months. The judge didn't need much convincing. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Both women were served within 48 hours. And for the first time since Noah was born, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic to check the locks or pace the hallway listening for phantom footsteps. The fallout was brutal for them, and poetic for me. The podcast episode hadn't just gone viral online, it had exploded locally, too. Everyone who had ever been on their holiday card list now saw them in a new light, and that light was ugly. Karen stopped showing up to her church socials after someone confronted her in the parking lot, saying they'd never trust her around their kids again. Linda, ever the martyr, tried spinning her story in a tear-soaked Facebook post about being misunderstood, but it backfired spectacularly when one of her own relatives commented with a link to the podcast and wrote, "You did this to yourself." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching them choke on the lies they so confidently fed everyone else was satisfaction enough. I had bigger things to focus on. I'd spent so long surviving that I almost forgot what it felt like to actually live. So I made a decision, not just a symbolic one, not just a fresh coat of paint on the same old life. I decided to disappear. I sold the house, liquidated everything that had even a drop of bad memory soaked into it, and packed what little remained into the back of an old station wagon. I chose a city 3 states away where no one knew my name, where the schools were decent, the rent was manageable, and the air didn't carry the scent of past mistakes. I dyed my hair darker, started using my middle name as my first, and registered Noah under a new last name that had no connection to either family line. I found a quiet little rental on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but it had a fenced yard and a cracked front porch where I could drink coffee in peace without expecting a car to pull up and ruin my morning. For a while, everything was still. Safe. Simple. Noah started sleeping better, and so did I. I even started laughing again, small things at first, a chuckle at a ridiculous diaper commercial or a grin at the way Noah clapped when I sang off-key lullabies. It was the kind of healing I didn't think I'd ever earn, but there it was, one soft moment at a time. But peace, I've learned, is never permanent. One night, about 2 months after we moved in, I came home from the grocery store and noticed something strange on the front door. At first, I thought it was a note from the landlord or maybe an advertisement someone had taped up. But the moment I stepped closer, my blood turned to ice. It was a single sheet of paper, plain white, taped dead center on the door at eye level. 5 words scrawled in thick black ink. "You can run, but you can't erase blood." I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking around the grocery bags, my heart pounding like a drum inside my ribs. It could have been a prank. It could have been coincidence. It could have been nothing. But when you've lived under siege for long enough, your mind doesn't go to innocent explanations anymore. It jumps straight to fear, straight to suspicion, straight to the worst-case scenario that you've trained yourself never to dismiss. Was it Linda? Was it Karen? Had one of them tracked me down, followed the breadcrumbs I thought I'd swept away? Or was it something worse? Was I just permanently haunted now, always looking over my shoulder, always expecting the past to claw its way back through the cracks no matter how far I run? I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. I just tore the note down, shredded it into pieces, and stood there on the porch with the wind in my hair, wondering how long this fragile calm would last. Some people say you leave the past behind. But if the past wants to own you, it never knocks. It just finds a way in.